So session 2, we're going to talk about writing out your process. Now, when it comes to writing out your process, the way I like to correlate this is if you were an architect and you were planning on building a building, you wouldn't actually just go and start building right away. What you would do is you would create a blueprint for what it is that you're trying to build prior to going in and getting things set up. And that's what we're going to focus on today, is understanding, one, what is it that we're trying to build, and also collecting the different tools and things that we need in order to build it. That's what a blueprint really gives you, is the ability to see ahead of time what it is that you're trying to build. So let's jump in and we're going to get started. The other thing that I also am going to mention is that there are going to be people who are watching this who might not have a business process yet. This webinar should hopefully help those people as well who might not have a fleshed out process and are still trying to figure out what is it that I should typically do. So we're going to cater to both groups of people today, because I know if you're a new business owner, sometimes process can be a scary thing, but hopefully some of the things we talk about today will definitely help iron out some things that you might want to do. So perfect, let's get into it here. So we're going to talk about 4 things today. Number 1, we're going to talk about 3 different phases of business that's going to play an important role in your workflow processes. The second thing we're going to talk about is process questions that you should ask yourself, and that's going to help the people who are trying to flesh out their process. Number 3, we're going to talk about what, when, and which I know that sounds a little weird right now, but it'll make more sense once we get there. And then the last thing we're going to do is actually write out the process. And that's where the Notion template will come into play, just a free resource for you. So we'll get into that last. So let's go ahead and dive in here. So 3 phases of business. What I want to do first, before we talk about those 3 phases of business, is just do a quick review of what we talked about yesterday. Again, we're pulling concepts from previous webinars every time we do one here. So yesterday, what we talked about was what encompasses your business process or your full workflow process in Dubsado. And we talked about how where Dubsado comes into the mix is from the moment that someone is interested in working with you, they've expressed direct interest, all the way through providing that actual service. That's where Dubsado really shines. All of the email marketing and promoting and running campaigns and all of that for sales, all of that's usually done outside of Dubsado, but once someone is interested, that's where your workflow really comes into play. Now, what I like to do is take those different things, I'll go back one slide here, interest, decision, booked client, provide service, all those different things. I like to take those and boil those down into 3 different phases of your business. Now, there could potentially be more. There could be 4 or 5. I'll kind of get into that later. But at its core, there's usually about 3. And that is the inquiry phase, where someone is inquiring about your service or they're interested in working with you or purchasing your product. Then there's the booking phase, and that's really where you're pitching your services to them. Now, what we talked about yesterday, maybe you start at the booking level. Remember, we talked about public proposals yesterday, where people are just purchasing directly from your website. You technically would start at the booking level where they're filling out a proposal. But maybe you start with inquiry, transition into introducing your pricing to them, because at some point you have to pitch your pricing. You have to say, hey, this is what my services cost. Do you want to buy? Which is that decision action level. And then booked. So inquiry, booking, and booked. That's just a really great way of summing up kind of the 3 different phases of business. Now, you might have more beyond booked. Maybe you have like an offboarding workflow potentially, or maybe you might have, kind of a renewal workflow. So there could potentially be more, but at the core, there's usually 3. So that's a good way to think about it. There is those 3 phases. And like I said, that will come into big play when you're writing out your workflow process. So how does this relate? So we have inquiry, booking, and booked. We're going to kind of go back to those same concepts from yesterday here and talk about how that works on your projects page. So we talked about yesterday the difference between lead projects and job projects, where leads are anyone who has not booked with you yet, and jobs are projects who have made that transition and now they have booked with you. So they've signed a contract, paid an invoice, things like that. So on your projects page, the inquiry and booking area, those two phases are usually revolved around the lead phase, because when you send out a proposal to someone or whenever you pitch your pricing to somebody, they're not booked with you yet. At that phase in your business process, you only talk to them about pricing. It's only once they sign a contract or pay, or maybe both, depending on how your business works, that's really what makes them a booked job project. So inquiry and booking are going to kind of be in the leads section over there. And then jobs, those are going to be in the booked section in the jobs area. So that's how you can kind of take those two phases or three phases and split them. So hopefully that makes sense on how those things are divided in the system. Okay, so now let's get into these process questions. Now, like I said, these are going to be very helpful for anyone who doesn't really understand their process yet. Maybe they know a couple things that they want to do, but they haven't actually fleshed out the entire process yet. And maybe for some of you who have been in business for, a long time, but you've never actually sat down to develop a standard operating procedure. You've never sat down and said, I'm going to actually write out everything that I do, so that way every client gets the same level of service, gets the same content. I don't forget to do anything, which is also really important, because you never want to miss out on all the intricate details of that client experience. Okay, so we're going to dive into these 6 questions, and this is going to be part of the homework that you'll do today. So you'll want to kind of pay attention to these questions here. So I really believe that if you can answer these 6 questions, then that actually is your workflow process. So if you know the answers to these questions, you really know your workflow. So that helps. If you don't know the answers to some of these questions, maybe it would be good to go in and kind of look through and see if you can flesh out some more detail in some of these questions. So along the left-hand side here, you can see where I have inquiry, booking, and book. So it's still those phases there, but there's questions that you can ask yourself inside of those different phases. So inquiry has 1 question, booking has 2, and booked has 3. So we'll dive into these questions here. Number 1 is, what is the very first thing that should happen when a new lead comes in? Usually a lot of people know the answer to that one, but as you go through, sometimes it gets a little more hazy. Number 2, and we're going to actually, after this, break down each one of these questions here. So I'm just going to read through these really quickly. So number 1, what is the very first thing that should happen when a new lead comes in? Number 2, and this is where the booking phase comes into play, what are the next steps to get them booked? Then number 3 is, when do you consider the client to be booked? What is it that makes them a booked client? That's very important to understand, because when we're thinking about moving someone from being a lead project and then becoming a job project, we need to know what that milestone is. What is it that's going to pick them up from being a lead and then make them a job? So that's important to flesh out in number 3. Number 4, once the client is booked, what happens next? So now they're booked, what's the next thing that you do? Number 5 is, when does your work with the client conclude? So what is that barometer that now your work is officially finished with them, or that service at least is finished? Is it them just picking a product, or the actual date? We'll get into a little bit of that here in a second, but when does your work with the client conclude? And then the last question is, do you send out any follow-ups after your work has ended? So when you're done, is there anything that you do after you're finished with them? So those are the 6 questions that you need to ask yourself, and know in detail what the answers to those questions are. Because like I said previously, that is your workflow. That's your business process. From the moment that a new lead comes in all the way until you're finished working with them, that whole process there. So let's deep dive into each one of these questions. So that way, if you don't know the answers to some of these questions, I can kind of give you some ideas or some inspiration, like what we were talking about yesterday. I can give you some inspiration or maybe some things that you could add to your process or maybe things that you've forgotten about. So we'll dive into these questions here. So, like I said, number one, what's the very first thing that should happen when a new lead comes in? Maybe you send out just a normal inquiry email response. So someone reaches out and then you send an email saying, hey, thank you so much for reaching out. I'll be in touch with you in 24 to 48 hours. I know that's kind of one of those typical common responses, but do you send one of those out to your clients? When someone is interested, do you book a consultation with them or a discovery call? When maybe you send out a questionnaire to gather more information from them. So when they reach out, you determine they're a good fit and maybe you want to gather more information via a questionnaire. Or maybe you need to check your calendar to see if you're available, or maybe you call them. So these are all different things that you could potentially do when a new lead comes in, but it all determines and it all can be based off of your specific business or what you're comfortable with or what you think will work the best for your industry. So there's a lot of different things that you can do there. That's number one. That's the inquiry phase there. Number two, and in the phases that I was showing earlier where I had proposal written next to booking, usually in the booking phase, when you're looking at a proposal in Dubsado, that's normally when you're introducing the booking phase. The reason why is because the proposal is designed to create an invoice in the system. So I usually only recommend introducing a proposal when you're ready for an invoice to get created. If you're not ready for an invoice to get created, maybe you could use like a questionnaire for a pricing sheet just so they can see it. But the proposal is designed to create invoices. So normally at the booking level, that's when I usually recommend going in and introducing the proposal to them. So maybe you do a proposal, whether it's more of picking different packages or you do a custom quote with someone. So it's different for every single client. You can use proposals in that sense as well. Maybe you need to get a contract and a payment from them. Maybe you want to combine the proposal, contract, and invoice to them. So in some businesses I've chatted with, they want to do the proposal, contract, and invoice together in Dubsado and send it all out in one bundle. Then some other people might want to send it out separately. They don't want to do it all together. They want to do proposal, contract, and invoice all separately. Then you could maybe just lock in a date for this service. Maybe that's what you need to do to get them booked, is just get a date set. So those are some different things that are available in Dubsado and typical for getting them booked. The next thing, and this is like, again, what I said, very, very important, is when do you consider the client to be booked? What turns them from a lead to a job? Is it them signing the contract? Is it them making a deposit? Is it them paying in full? Maybe it's a combination of some of those things. That's actually what I'm going to do today is talk about combinations maybe. Or maybe it's them completing a questionnaire, something like that. So what is it? Narrow that down. When do you consider the client to be booked in Dubsado? Then number 4, now we're transitioning into the last 3 questions, which is the booked phase. So maybe you send out more emails. So once they're booked, maybe you have a couple emails that they need to receive. Maybe there's certain documents or forms that they need to get. Maybe you want to introduce the client portal. We have a client portal in Dubsado. For those of you who aren't familiar, we don't really have time to go in and look at the client portal and all of that. Maybe you could check that out outside of the webinar, but maybe that's when you want to introduce the client portal to them. Sometimes on calls, I will say this right now, just for anyone who's curious about the client portal, a lot of times on calls, I've had people ask, when should I introduce the client portal to them? Typically, what I've seen is people do that once someone is booked in the system, because once they're booked and you introduce that client portal, they would be able to see their invoice, see their contract you sent them, see the proposal, all of those different things. So that's typically when people introduce it from what I've seen, but you honestly can introduce it at any point. It's completely up to you. But for those of you who are just saying, tell me when I should introduce it, usually you should introduce it after they're booked with you, as kind of, hey, if you need to review any documents, it's all in here. Maybe you do a kickoff meeting with them, or maybe you need to send them a timeline for the event or project. So there's a lot of things in that space where it's typical to onboarding. So now that you are actually booked with me, how can we get you onboarded and up to speed with what's going on there? That's really where number 4 comes in. Number 5, when does your work with the client conclude? Is it when you deliver the product to the client? So anyone who's in the design business who's watching this, is it when you give your deliverables to them? Or maybe you want to upsell them or send out a new invoice. So maybe you don't technically end your service, where you actually want to upsell them and get them on something else. Is it project date based? So all of my people in here who might be event planners or who might be in the wedding industry or anything like that, is it project date based, where once the date passes, now it's actually over? Recurring clients. So these are going to be people, maybe you're in the web design industry and you do maintenance for people, or it could be potentially like accountants, where that's more of kind of a recurring thing that you do. You just work with them every single year. It's important to flesh out when you're actually done working with them. So take inventory of that. Number 6, and this is the last question here. Do you send any follow-ups after your work has ended? So when you're done working with them, do you send out any Facebook, Yelp, or Google reviews? Do you send out like a questionnaire or a survey for them to fill out and get feedback on how the service was? If you're in the wedding industry, do you send out anniversary emails a year after their wedding? Do you mail or ship any physical gifts? Sometimes people, when they're done working with someone, they'll send a thank you card or they'll send the client a gift. Do you do anything like that? Or maybe you have check-in sessions. So maybe once you're done working with someone, you check in with them 2 months later to see if they're still liking the product, or maybe you want to pitch them on something else. So it's important to know that once that milestone has passed of working with them, do you do anything outside of that after? That's important to flesh out as well, because sometimes we forget about that. We get the job done, it's over, we move on to the next thing, and we don't think about what do we do after that's over. So if you can answer all 6 of those questions, that's going to be your workflow process. And you want to write these out in as much detail as possible, because as you can kind of see here, that's going to turn into what you build in Dubsado. So the more detail, the better. If you don't have a lot of detail, start with what you know. Maybe you're in an industry where the only thing you know is they need to sign a contract. Start with that. A 1-action workflow to send the contract, and that's all you need to do. You can build on that and your business will grow and you'll get more familiar, but just start with what you know first, and then you can build on top of that. All right, so now we're going to jump into what, when, and which. And to me, this is very important when you are writing out your workflow, because it's going to help you not only when we talk tomorrow about translating your process in Dubsado. That's going to be a very important one tomorrow as well. It's going to help you translate from what you wrote down into Dubsado if you write it out in this format. So that's why I want to introduce it today. So tomorrow, when we talk about translating that process, it will really connect with why you wrote it out this way. So when you are writing out your business process, so when you're going through and answering those 6 questions, you need to include 3 things in each step that you're writing out. The first thing that you want to do is write what it is that you want to do. And this is something that everyone usually does when they're writing out their process. They can easily write what it is that they want to do. When I have calls with people and they're kind of breaking down their process, usually everyone can tell me what is it that you want to do. Then when do you want it to happen? This is so important to get nailed down, is when do you want that specific action to happen? You can't really say, I just want it to happen sometime later. You need to be very specific about when that action is going to happen. And then the third thing that you want to do is write out which piece or pieces of content do you need in that particular step. Is there a proposal that's going out? Is there a contract? Is there a scheduler? You want to write out what is going out or which piece of content is going out in that particular action. Now, when I write out this process for you, that is the one that I'm going to be using, you'll see how I do this each time. And I have the template, which we're going to get into here in a second. I have the template laid out in a way that allows for that. So in every step, you want to include what you want to do, when you want it to go out, and which piece of or pieces of content are going out in each step. Okay? All right, so now let's talk about writing out the process, and we'll get into the Notion template here in a second. I know everyone is probably wondering, okay, how do I do this? What am I going to get into here? We'll break all of that down. So before I do that, I want to give a few tips before we get into actually writing out your process. So there are a lot of you that probably look inside in your business and say, I have 1,000 different processes. Where am I supposed to start? And you can immediately get overwhelmed at that moment, and you start to hesitate because you might say, well, I do weddings and I also do anniversary shoots and I do family shoots and I do all these different things. Where in the world should I start? What I usually recommend doing is choosing one of these three things. Either start with your shortest. So if you just want to get something out of the way and you know that one of your workflows is going to be maybe 3 or 4 steps, start with that one. Just do the simplest, easiest possible one that you can, and that will get you rolling so you can get just at least a quick win in there. So either start with your shortest or start with your most familiar. So if you have maybe different processes, but you're not really familiar with some of the other ones, or you don't really have them laid out as much, start with the one that you know the most. I'll use photography again here, but let's say I do wedding photography, anniversary shoots, and maybe I do family shoots. And the anniversary and family ones I'm not too sure about, but I know my wedding process like the back of my hand. Start with that one, because then it will get the ball rolling as well. Number 3, or this is the last one here, is do your most popular. So if you're somebody who, you're wanting to get the ball rolling inside of your account, and this is the one that everyone does and it's my most popular service, so you want to get that one off the ground the fastest, start with that one. So one of those 3 things, you can kind of pick and choose on which one you would feel the most comfortable with, but choose one of those 3 to get started. Now, let's get into another question that people usually have and where people get stuck. And that is, I have a fork in the road. If they do this, then I want it to go this route. Or if they go this way, I want it to go down this road. Or if they say yes, I want it to go down this path. Or no, I want it to go down this path. In Dubsado, our workflows are linear, meaning that you can't branch them out in that way. So what I usually recommend doing, if they say yes, I want them to go here. If they say no, I want them to go here. What I always recommend doing is start by writing it out as if they will say yes. And there's some reasons for that. The first one is, this will get you to write out your complete process. If I'm starting to write out my process and there's a fork in the road and it's, oh, well, if they say yes, it goes here. If it's no, then they go here. Start with yes, because that gets the ball rolling and you can actually get through your complete process. Think about them going through all the steps in your workflow as if they're going to say yes. The other thing that does is it just gets you in the right headspace of, yeah, they are going to purchase my product, because we can get into a space where we think of the no all the time. Well, if they say no, I need to make sure to do this and this, and you get caught up in that mentality. But if you start with yes, then it gets you all the way through your workflow, and it gets you in the right headspace of, okay, when they say yes, I want this to happen and this to happen and this to happen. So start with a yes when you're writing out your process there. Okay, one last thing, and then we're going to jump in and we're going to actually look at the Notion template, and I'll break all of that down and talk you through how to do everything in there. But before I do that, I want to talk about some tips for you, okay? Number one, when you are writing out your process, and I would say out of all of these, this one is probably the most important one. Use the phrase email the blank anytime that you're sending a form or a scheduler to somebody. Use that phrasing, and it will make more sense when I actually write it here in a second so you can understand why I say that. If you are ever emailing a form or a scheduler to a client, you want to use the phrase when you're writing out your process, email the blank, okay? That's number one. Number two, schedulers in Dubsado could have potentially 3 emails attached to them. This is something that a lot of people do not realize is built into the system, but in Dubsado, schedulers have 3 potential emails that can be attached to them. I'm actually going to jump into Dubsado here. We had a ton of scheduler questions yesterday after the webinar was over. So I'm going to go in really quick and just show you these 3 emails just so you're aware. Underneath templates and scheduler, I'm going to jump into one of my scheduler templates here. The first email that you can use with your scheduler is this one at the bottom. This one here is what we like to call the invitation email. What this one is designed to do is to invite somebody to book a call with you. So you can even see it in the language that's here where it says, I'd like to schedule an appointment with you. Let me know when is best for you. And it has a scheduler link in there. If I'm going to send this scheduler, this is going to be the email that it pulls from when I try to send it. I can change the email, obviously, but this is the default one that comes up. This is the invitation email where I'm inviting someone to book a call with me. So that's the first one. The second one is in the advanced tab, and actually the third one is as well, but in the advanced tab, you'll see right here where it says confirmation email. Your confirmation emails are built into the scheduler template. So that means that they do not need to be in your workflow. Confirmation emails do not go in there. They go in the scheduler template because when someone uses this scheduler template, that confirmation email will automatically go out to them because it was used on this template. So confirmation emails, that's another one that's in there. And the last one is just a little bit further down where it says notification, and those are your appointment reminders. So something that I do want to say, because I see it a lot, but it'll help all of you who are wanting to write out your process and build your workflows. Confirmation emails and appointment reminders go in the scheduler template, not in your workflow. That's just a good rule of thumb whenever you're getting things set up. You'll run into a ton of issues if you try to put your confirmation and appointment reminders in your workflow. So those 3 emails, invitation, confirmation, and appointment reminders, those can all go in your scheduler, and you don't want to forget about those whenever you're collecting your content. And we'll get into that in a second. The third thing here is what I like to call secret to-dos, okay? So in the system, there are 4 things that you're not just going to know off the top of your head. I usually like to create to-dos for them because then it reminds me to do those things, because it's not going to just flash in your face that you need to do these things. Number 1 is change the project title. In Dubsado, we don't have anything in the system that will update a project title at a certain point. Like if they select this package, it will update the project title, or once they book or sign a contract, it will update the project title. So if you want your project titles to change and you want to develop your own naming convention, I would recommend putting a to-do in your workflow to change your project title if you want that. Number 2 is the project date. If you are using our scheduler templates, something that's very important to know with this, and I'm kind of getting all of these things out of the way here. Scheduler templates cannot set project dates. And that's very important with how our scheduler is built at the moment, is that when someone books using our scheduler templates, it doesn't set a project date, it sets an appointment date. And those are two different things. So if someone books on a scheduler and you need it to be the project date, you will actually need to manually go in and set up that project date. Now, that isn't for everybody. You might not be in that scenario, but if you need it to be the project date, you might need to create a to-do after they book an appointment to set the project date. Number 3 is the portal password. Some people don't know how the portal password works, but in the system, we don't have a way to automatically generate a portal password for somebody if you want a specific one. If you want a specific one, you will need to go into their project and create one yourself. So maybe you want to put a to-do in there to set a portal password for them. And the last thing is countersigning the contract. Some people forget to countersign the contracts that they have. So maybe after they sign a contract, you want to create a to-do to countersign the contract so you don't forget. So there's a lot of different things in there. Some you might say, yes, I need that. Some maybe not. But those are 4 things that I would say are surprise things that people want to remember to do but forget to do it. So maybe you want to add that into your workflow as tasks that you can do. Number 4, identify actions that need to be approved. One misconception about workflows in Dubsado is that they are 100% automated. They are not 100% automated. You can make them like that, but in Dubsado, when you are emailing things to clients, sending forms, sending contracts, sending scheduler templates, you can approve things to go out, and we'll look at that on Thursday when we talk about building the workflow. You can approve things to go out before they actually go out to the client. So you want to identify the things that need to be approved. Number 5 is don't forget to archive your projects. In Dubsado, you can archive your projects in the workflow. You can have your workflow take them off of your main projects page area, which I'll jump over there so you can kind of get a visual of that. Your leads and jobs area should only be projects that you're actively working on. If you have finished working with someone or they are a cold lead and they're not coming back, you can actually archive them over on this far right-hand side and just get them out of the way. So archiving projects is a great way to kind of keep your leads and jobs list really clean, and it's only people that you're actively working with. And we're going to show you how to do that when we build the workflow and do all of that. But don't forget that that's a possibility in the system, that you can archive projects. The other thing that you can do that I'll talk about here, and you'll see it when we actually build the workflow, is you can archive projects if they don't fill out a certain form. And that comes into play a lot if you're using proposals. So let's say that I pitch my pricing to a client, and if they don't fill out that proposal after a certain amount of days, I know they're not going to want to work with me, so I want to archive them. And in Dubsado, there's a way that if a form is not completed, you can archive them. And so that's just a couple things that you really don't want to forget, because it will just add to your efficiency with the workflow. Then the last thing, and we talked about this yesterday, don't worry about building the perfect workflow. When you get in there and you want to say, I want to set up the perfect workflow so that it's never going to make a mistake and that I'm never going to have to change it, just get that out of your head. When you're building your workflow, especially at first, just start with the basics, and then you're going to test it. We're going to talk about that later this week, but you want to test out your workflow, get comfortable with it. You might want to change an email here, change a form there. So your workflows, like I said yesterday, are a living process. They are going to continue to change over time as your business grows. So don't worry about building the perfect workflow. Okay, so for the rest of the time, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to use this Notion template. And what we'll do, I just wanted to make sure we're at that stage here. So we're going to look at our example workflow, and I'm going to switch screens here. So give me just a moment. Okay, so when you clicked on the handouts tab and you clicked on the Notion template, if you do not have Notion, you will have to sign up for an account. I want to preface that first. The other thing that I want to preface at this point before we dive in here and talk about all of this is a couple things. Number one is that you do not have to use this template. I don't want people to feel like the only way that I can set up my workflow is if I use this template. That is not true. If you want to use a scratch piece of paper, if you want to use sticky notes, if you want to use a mind map software like Whimsical or Miro or one of those types of platforms, you can use that. You do not have to use this particular template. So that's one thing I want people to understand first, is you don't have to use it. The second thing is that with Notion, this is just something that I enjoy using personally. So Dubsado does not sponsor Notion. We're not in a partnership with them or anything along those lines. I just want to make that clear that Notion is not connected to Dubsado in any way. It's a completely third-party system that's used for task management, checklists, all these different things and cool tools that you can use. I just personally use Notion pretty much every single day in my everyday life. So that's just what I'm using for this particular thing. But I wanted you all to have access to this template, because as I'm going through here, it would be kind of unfair if I said, this is what I have, but you can't use it. So I created this template and I wanted to make it available for you in case you want to use it. So those are just a couple things that I wanted to get out of the way first. But before we jump in here, number one is that you will have to create a Notion template, or sorry, a Notion account before you actually get this template. Notion is free. So if you're using it by yourself, it's completely free to use. So I wouldn't have you sign up for something that you have to pay for. Notion is completely free. So sign up for an account first. And then what you'll do is, if you have a Notion account, what you'll see when you click on that link is up in the top right-hand corner, there's a duplicate button. You'll want to click on duplicate and it will copy it into your account. So there's kind of two things that you might need to do. If you don't have Notion yet, sign up for an account first, then open up that handout that I have in there and click duplicate, and it will copy it into your account just for you to use. If you already have Notion, when you click on that, just click duplicate in the top right and you'll have access to it. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. That's how you can get access to the template. So hopefully that works. I'm going to continue and kind of break all this down inside of here and show you how you can use this, but make sure you do those two steps first and then you'll have access to it. So inside of this page, what you're going to do first is you're going to use, and remember we just talked about it, what and which and when, those three things here. So we're going to actually write out a process here, and then I'm going to show you what you'll do from there. So what I'm going to do here, I have a process that's written up on the side of my screen just so I remember all of the steps that I wanted to put in here. I'm going to write these in. Before I write them in, there's one other thing that I wanted to mention. It's what we talked about yesterday. When I write this in here, this probably will not be your process. This is just a process that I created. And the way that I have this process written out is designed to show you the most of what Dubsado can do with a workflow. So I basically built a process where we're going to use the most actions and triggers that we possibly can, just so you can see what's possible. So this might not be your process. Maybe you want to pull some ideas from this process. But before we go in, the idea here is inspiration, not imitation. So just remember that as we walk through this. So when I'm writing out my process, what you'll see along the left-hand side here is I have some blocks set aside for inquiry, booking, and booked. Because when we get into everything on Thursday, when we build our workflows, we're actually going to be building separate workflows for different phases of your workflow. That's why I wanted to talk about it today, so that when I do it on Thursday, all of you aren't saying, why is he doing that? So I already have the inquiry, booking, and booked already laid out with 5 in each section. You can add more to those and things like that, but they're already laid out here on the side. So I'm going to start at the top here. Remember, in inquiry, what we want to do first is talk about what do we do the moment that the lead is interested in working with me. So let's say I have a lead capture form on my website. We looked at this earlier, where I have a lead capture form and then they might choose wedding. So I want to knock out that workflow if they choose wedding. Once they submit that form, what's the first thing that should happen once they fill out my lead capture form? For me, I want to review my lead capture form, and that's actually going to be a to-do. So it's a task that I need to get done. When you're writing out your workflow, you want to literally write out everything that you need to do, including tasks, because in a workflow, you can build tasks into your workflow. So I want to review my lead capture form. That's the thing that I want to do, what I want to do there. I don't have any which in here because I'm not actually sending content. So I have what I want to do, and I want to do this after the lead capture form or after the lead capture form has been filled out. So I can put that in there. And the other thing that I have here for you in this template is an approve column. We talked about whether or not you want to approve things before they go out. Well, what you're able to do is you're able to add in if you want to approve something before it goes out. And we'll get into that here in a second. So the next thing that I want to do, so after I've reviewed the lead capture form, I want to send out a discovery call scheduler to them. I've determined that they're a good fit, so I want to send out my discovery call scheduler. So remember in the tips that I gave you, anytime that you are emailing a scheduler template to somebody or a form, you want to use the phrase email the blank. So I'm going to say email the discovery call scheduler. And when I want to do this is after I've reviewed the lead capture form. Pretty easy there. Then what I want to do is I'm just looking at my process here to make sure I don't skip over anything. In my process, I want them to fill out a questionnaire prior to the call, because what I want to do is when I get on a call with them, I want to have some context on things that we can talk about. So once they book a call with me, I want to send them a questionnaire. So I'm going to say email the discovery call questionnaire. That's what I'm going to do. That's what I want to do and which piece of content is going out after they book a call. Very simple. I'm just writing these things out. You're actually seeing this live here. Then what I want to do is if they don't fill out that questionnaire, I want to send them a reminder in 2 days. Now, I said 2 days because I want people to know that when you're talking about time frames on things and when, it's great to be specific. And I'll show you why here. If I go in here and I say, send a reminder email if they don't fill out the questionnaire after 2 days, okay? I put 2 days in there because when I'm building the workflow, we don't have triggers that say a few days later. You're going to have to be specific on this is when I want this to happen. So make sure you're putting time frames in there. If it's something like 2 days later or a week later or 5 days, you want to write that in there and be as specific as possible. The next thing that I want to do here is before the consultation, I want to get a reminder that I need to prep for it. So what I'm going to do, and this is just another task I'm going to do here, is I'm going to say prep for the discovery call. And I want to do this, let's just say 1 day before the call. So I'm being specific on when I want to be reminded I need to get this finished, okay? Then the next thing that I'm going to do, I actually want to duplicate this here so I have an extra slot. So in here, what I'm going to do, my next one is I want to create a task once I'm done with the call if they want to move forward or not. Because obviously with the discovery call, I don't know if the client actually wants to move forward or if they want to do something else. So I'm just going to create a little task for myself to determine what the best fit is for them after the call is over. So I could say determine if client is moving forward. And I'm just going to say that I want to do that just immediately after the call. Okay, so like I said, this is probably not your process, but you can see how if I've written out my process questions, I can literally just go here in here and plug this in. So just step by step, I'm plugging it in there. So I'm not writing it in any fancy language. That's one thing I want you to know, is that tomorrow I'm going to teach you how to translate that. In here, all I'm doing is I'm just writing it out in my language. So it doesn't have to be fancy when you're writing this out. That's everything that I want to do for my inquiry phase, because the next thing that I want to do, if they are a good fit, I want to send them a proposal. And we talked about the booking phase. So if I'm planning on introducing a proposal now, I'm going to transition to my next phase. So in here, I'm going to go to booking now, and I'm going to say email the proposal. And in my situation, I'm just going to do the contract and the invoice all in one bundle. Maybe you don't do that, so you'll need some separate actions. But for me, I'm just going to do it all together. So email, the proposal, contract, and invoice. And I'm just going to say when I've determined that they're a good fit. Again, not fancy language here. I'm just literally talking and writing this out so you can see what you should do here. Then what I want to do is send a reminder email. And this is for the proposal. Send a reminder email if they haven't filled it out. If they haven't filled it out after 3 days, again, specific, not a few days later, specific, 3 days after they haven't filled it out, I want to send a reminder. The other thing that I want to do here, because we talked about archiving projects and we talked about if they don't fill out a proposal, maybe we can archive them. What I would say here is archive the project. Whoops, I should spell archive correct here. Archive the project, and we'll say if they don't fill out the proposal after, let's just say 10 days. I'll give them 10 days to fill it out. So again, I'm being very specific here. And then the last thing that I'm going to write in, and then I'm going to move on to the second thing just for sake of time, so that we're not, writing out everything in booked and all of that. Tomorrow, I'll have all of this written out so you can see, but just for sake of time, I'll move on to the next step. The other thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to say the lead becomes a job, because remember, I believe it's number 3 in the questions is when does a lead become a job? Lead becomes a job once they sign the contract and pay 50% deposit. So I'm being specific again. Once they sign the contract and pay the 50% deposit, that's technically what makes them a book job. I want to make sure I put that out there. Now, is there anything in here that I would like to approve? Because remember, you can approve things before they go out. Well, the proposal, I definitely want to. I want to make sure that everything is good to go before I send out the proposal. So in your Notion template, what you can do is actually click in here and you can put approve. And that's going to signal to you whenever you're actually building this out that this is something that needs to be approved. I also want, looking at this, let's say I want to approve my discovery call scheduler as well. So I'm just going to add a little approve in there as well. So you can go through, look at your actions and say, what is it that I want to approve? Does that need to be approved? No, that's okay. Yes, I want to approve that. And you can actually click in this box and put approve on there. Okay. Now, before we move on to the next thing here, what I want you to know is these actions and trigger sections over here, these are for tomorrow. So if you want to play around with those, you can, but I'm going to show you how to translate everything on this Notion template tomorrow. So don't worry about these actions and trigger sections. That's going to be explained in detail tomorrow. Just worry about writing out your process and then the approving, okay? So let's say that you have all of this written out. The next step that you're going to do is you're going to highlight your content. And this to me is one of the coolest things that you can do with your process, because it's going to help you understand what you need to build in Dubsado. So I have everything color coded down here, and these are just the colors that I have on here. You can change them if you want to, but this is just what I have. The reason you want to highlight things is because you don't want to forget content that you need to build in Dubsado. It's not enough just to have your process written out. If you don't have your proposal built, you can't add it to the workflow. If you don't have your scheduler built, you can't add it to the workflow. So here is going to be where you can highlight your content. I'm going to show you how to do that in this section. So the reason that I have it written out, actually, I'll talk about the first one here. In green, you'll see down here, in green are my tasks, okay? So anything that is a task, I'm going to make green. So at the top, my very first thing that I need to do is a task. I need to review the lead capture form. So in Notion, if you click in this box and just highlight the text there, you can do a bunch of cool things with this. You can bold it if you want to, or do different things. But underneath the A, you can actually change the text color. So here, I'm going to make this green because it's a task that I need to get done. So I'm going to make that green so I know it's a task. The next thing is email the discovery call scheduler. This is why it's so important to use the language email the blank, is this reason. If I'm going to email a scheduler to somebody, I need two things. I need a scheduler template to send out to them, and I need an email to send that scheduler. If I don't remember that, I might build a scheduler and forget about my canned emails. When I talk to people on calls, canned emails is the one thing that so many people forget that they need. So why you write it out as email the blank is because now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to highlight this orange, because down here you'll see that I have scheduler templates as orange. So I can make this one orange here. And then what I can do so I don't forget about my canned emails is I can actually highlight email here, and I'm going to make this one red. So now I know in this particular action, I have two things that I need. I need to make my discovery call scheduler, and I need to write an email for it. And that could be my invitation email that we talked about earlier, okay? Then I want to email the discovery call questionnaire. Now down here, you'll notice that I have forms as blue. So in here, pretty simple, this is a form. So I'm going to highlight this here, and I'm going to change this to blue. And I need an email for it. So I'm going to highlight this here, and I'm going to change this one to red. Then I have a reminder email that needs to go out. So this is just a plain reminder email. So I can highlight this here, and I can change this over to red. Prep for the discovery call. This is a task I need to get done. So I can make this one green. So you can see all I'm doing right now is I'm just color coding everything. And this is just for me personally. It makes so much more sense to me when I can see things color coded. Maybe this isn't for you. Maybe you want to do a different way. And like I said earlier, do what works best for you. Not just, you don't have to use this template, but now I can see things so clearly. So here, email the proposal, contract, and invoice. So in this one, I know I need an email. So we'll put that in there. We'll change that to red. This one is blue because I need a proposal. That's a form. So that's blue. I need a contract. So we'll highlight that. And that's also a form that I need. And invoices aren't forms, so I don't need to highlight that. And then I need another email. Now what you're probably seeing here is, whoa, I need a lot of content in Dubsado. And the answer is yes, you do. A lot of people just don't know, hey, I need these different pieces of content in order to build my workflow. Now, those are all of the things that I need to highlight here. I don't have any more tasks that I need to get done or anything like that. The last thing that you need to do, and then we'll wrap up for today. I know we're right at about an hour, so I'll speed through this last part here. Once you have things color coded, the last thing that you're going to do is actually write out what it is that you need to build. So I can look up here and see I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 emails. So down here, I could say I need a discovery call email. I also need a questionnaire email. I'm going to need a proposal email. I need a reminder email. And also I put at the bottom down here, remember, scheduler templates might have confirmation and appointment reminders. So you can write those in there. Your scheduler templates, I need a discovery call scheduler. You can just plug that in. I need a proposal. I need a questionnaire here. So you can use these down here to actually collect your information. And then what you can also do is once you've built it in the system, you can literally come in and just check these things off that you have them done. So when I write my discovery call email, I can just check this off. Boom, I have it written. I have that done, that done, that done. So this template, you can literally just use this to build your workflow. You can add more steps here if you want to. You can change the color schemes if you don't like the ones that I have. You can actually put, change the color schemes on there, and you can actually collect your content there as well. So that's the template. You can take it, use it. All you need to do is duplicate it into your Notion account, which is free, and you have complete access to it. So feel free to have fun with that. So the last thing here, and we're just going to wrap up, and then I'll answer questions for you all. Let me go back to my screen. So we'll stop sharing here for just a second and pop back over to my handout. So now we're back. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to talk about here is the homework, because I can't leave you without homework. So number one, you can probably already figure out what your homework is. Number one is to write out the answers in detail to your 6 process questions. Make sure you add what you want to do, which piece of content you're going to you want in there, and when that's going to happen. All of that needs to be in that Notion template. Number 2, use that template to collect a comprehensive list of the content that you need. And then number 3, go in and start building that content and check it off when you get it done. So a lot of people ask me, how long does it take to set up Dubsado? That is a very relative question. The reason why is solely because of content. If you have a process that is, I want to send out a proposal, contract, invoice, and that's it, it will take you no time at all to set up your Dubsado account. If you have a process where you send out a scheduler, a couple questionnaires, you do a proposal, then you do a follow-up questionnaire at the end, then you have check-in emails, a couple scheduler templates, that can definitely lengthen how long it takes to set up Dubsado. So it's all relative, but just start going in and building some of that content once you have it written out and highlighted and collected and all of that. So that's your homework for today. And then tomorrow we're going to dive into how to translate what you wrote out into Dubsado language.